Welcome to Good Faith Reads. I'm your host, Jana Peterson, one of those Ernest C. Hines Jr. spring interns at Good Faith Media. Good Faith Reads is a short podcast released twice a month in which we focus on one of our book authors at Good Faith Media. We have published more than 100 titles under our Nurturing Faith book imprint, and we invite you to check them out at goodfaithmedia.org/bookstore. Today's guest is Russ Dean, author of Finding a New Way Home, The Unlikely Path of a Reluctant Baptist Renegade. He's joining us remotely from Charlotte, North Carolina, where he and his wife, Amy, are pastors of Park Road Baptist Church. Russ, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. One of the standard questions we ask our authors on Good Faith Reads is if you could tell our listeners just what your book is about.
Amy and I have been co-pastors at Park Road Baptist for 20 years, and we have a wonderful ecumenical relationship with the other pastors on Park Road. There's 6 churches, and for 20 years, we've gotten together once a month to have lunch, basically just fellowship and get to know each other. And so about I don't know the year, but about 15 years ago, the Episcopal priest just down the street, a mile and a half down the road, said, Russ, you're not what most of our folks think of when they hear the word Baptist. Why don't you come talk to us about how you got where you are from where you started? Now, a little backstory there. He happened to know my family, and my father was a Southern Baptist minister, and he knew all that. So he knew a little bit about my kind of backstory. And so he knew kind of the trajectory, and he knew about our church and our theology and our work in Charlotte. And so it was fascinating. I sat down to prepare for a 1-hour basically Sunday school class for the adults at the Episcopal church down the street, and 9 experiences just came out. I really didn't have to work on this. I sat down to think, how did I get where I am from my much more traditional, much more conservative Southern Baptist background? And these experiences just came out, and they all could be expressed really in one sentence, one phrase, one line that I heard in a sermon or a lecture or a class in school and seminary. And so I put those 9 experiences down. I went down the street. I spent an hour talking to the Episcopalians about it, and it stayed in my mind. I gave that presentation another time or two to probably to our church, and then another church that had called me to come speak to them, and it just kind of stayed in my head for 5, 6, 8 years until I decided, why don't I put this together and see if I could write a book on this? And so I expanded each of the 9 experiences, and then paired that with a sermon, not a sermon that was written for this book, but over the 20 years. One thing I say in the book is that my congregation has kind of allowed me to practice my theology, to develop my theology while I'm preaching to them. It's been kind of, really nice, and to have that freedom. And so I went back and looked over, 15 years worth of preaching, and found sermons that kind of meshed with the theme of each of those chapters, the experiences that I had had. And so I paired those together as a way of saying, this is something that I have practiced, that I have learned, and I've kind of worked out this theology that's been developing as the co-pastor of a local Baptist church. And so that's how it all came together. And it's been a really fascinating experience to put that together and then to begin sharing that with some folks.
As a budding author, I'm always curious to know about the inception of a book. When did you know this book needed to be written instead of just keeping them to yourself or even your close community?
Well, as I say, I prepared that sort of a lecture for a Sunday school class presentation. I'm sure that I did. I'm sure that I did that for my church. A local church had called me, and these ideas just stayed with me. And as I presented them, each of the times that I presented them, it was just a lot of really interesting interaction with those. And I've done a lot of writing, and over the last 10 years, it's become an important part of my ministry and my work. And so I had been interested in books and writing a book. And so it just kind of occurred to me one day, well, I could take those 9 experiences and kind of turn them into a book. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a professor at a seminary here in Charlotte. And I mentioned to him one day, I'd like to write a book, but I don't have any idea how to do it. And he said, just start writing, just pick a chapter and start writing. Well, that encouragement, along with those kind of 9 discrete experiences, it was pretty easy to do. Okay, well, let me sit down and let me expand, this 3 minutes that I spent on the first point. Well, let me expand that into sort of 10 pages per chapter is kind of sort of my target. And so it really came together fairly easily, since I had kind of, that 9-point outline pretty easily, together.
Your book has a really unique format, I noticed, you start with these questions that you want that you're inviting your readers to consider, and then a narrative, and then you've paired that with a sermon. Can you just explain maybe why this is kind of a magic trifecta for this book?
The purpose of the book is not just to share, and really not mostly to share my journey, but to encourage people to consider their own journeys. And so I offer my story from, Southern Baptist preacher's kid to, co-pastor now of a theologically progressive Baptist church as an example. But my interest in the book really is not, I don't say everybody needs to end up where I am. That's not at all the purpose of the book. I'd like to encourage people to be able to engage their own questions. Who and what change your own faith? What has made your faith alive and real for you? And so how do I get people to engage their own story more than just to read my story? And so, I've read books that would have study questions, and I don't know why I decided to put those at the beginning of the chapter, but rather than, read the chapter and then have some study questions, I thought, what if I tried to sort of prime the pump and ask people to consider, some aspect of their own life, that follows the question I was asking in that chapter. Let me prime the pump, get them thinking about that, and then read the chapter. And then let me share with you how I have kind of engaged that as a public speaker, a pastor, a proclaimer. And so it has been an interesting kind of pairing those 3 different experiences. And, the response I've gotten from people has been really, really nice. They've said it's been great to have those questions to do just what you said, to help me start thinking about my own engagement in this aspect of faith before I read about yours. And I think maybe that's been a way to get people to engage in their own experience rather than just read about mine. So that's how that came about. And it seems to have been a pretty good formula,
We'll be right back in 30 seconds with more of Good Faith Reads.
Lot Carey is proud to bring you conversations with some of the best and brightest pastors coast to coast. Our new podcast, Pilgrimages of Striving and Thriving, delivers wisdom from the Black church for the whole church. Find us wherever you get your podcast or listen online at lotcarey.org. That's LOTTCAREY.org. We look forward to the pilgrimage with you.
Welcome back to Good Faith Reads. Today we're joined remotely by Russ Dean, author of Good Faith Media book, Finding a New Way Home. And I'm Jana Peterson of Good Faith Media. Russ, could you tell us a little bit about your writing process? Did you set weekly goals or daily word count? Did you ever face writer's block?
Yeah, I've never faced any writer's block. I usually have to cut rather than try to figure out what more to say. Amy and I are different that way about preaching. A lot of times I'll be working on a sermon and she'll say, "How's your sermon coming?" I say, "Well, I'm to the cutting point," So I've always got more to say than I need to say. I think my process, this friend of mine who said, "Well, just start writing." And it reminded me of something that I read in one of Anne Lamott's books. I think it was her book, Bird by Bird, where she says, just write, just start writing every day, just write. And so that was how this came about for me. And honestly, it was not difficult. It was a real joy. I had the 9 chapters laid out. I knew where I was going with the book before I started. I knew that people were engaged with that because of the 3 experiences that I had had in sharing those. And so, I just set out to figure out how I'm going to tell that story. The first experience happened my freshman year at Furman University. What else do I need to put in there to kind of engage and set the context for people and all that? And so it kind of like the first experience where I sat down and tried to figure out how I got where I am from where I started. It all just came out. When I sat down to write each chapter, it all just kind of came out. I did work on the writing for a couple of years in that I've spent a week in the winter, each of the last maybe 6 years, with a friend of mine, Dr. John Ballinger, who's a pastor in Baltimore. And John and I are part of a pastor's group that gets together each summer. We spend a week together preparing our lectionary preaching themes for the year. So we spent a week together for 17 years. And about 6 years ago, John and I, who do a lot of writing, said, let's get together in the winter and have a writer's retreat. And so a couple times some of these other pastors have joined us, but it's mostly been John and me. And we've gone to a little farmhouse on the eastern shore of Maryland. There's usually been snow on the ground and nothing to do but sit in a chair and, glue your seat of your pants to the seat of the chair and sit there all day long. And so I've gotten a lot of work done in 2 years of that retreat. So, I said, I'm really going to concentrate on finding the sermons that are going to go with these. And, so did a lot of, reading through old sermons. And so I worked on this book for 2 of those writing retreats. And it took those 2 years to kind of make it come together. But really, once I sat down to say, okay, I'm going to write this first chapter, it, however long it takes you to write 10 pages, it kind of came out pretty smoothly,
What's your hope for your readers as they spend time with your book?
I don't want to just share my story. I'm not asking people to mimic my journey of faith. I'm not asking anybody to land where I land on any of those 9 chapters. I'm not asking anybody to land where I land as a reluctant Baptist renegade, anything like that. That's just where I am. I am interested in, and the people that have responded to my book, this is how they have responded. They have said, this has really helped me. These are the questions I've had. A lot of people have said, I've never had any place to ask these questions in my church. I've never been able to engage these. I talked with a friend who was in seminary with me. He's been an associate pastor for 30 years. And he said, Russ, I've not been able to ask the questions you've engaged since I was a seminary student. I can't ask those in any of the churches I've been in. I can't engage to the level that you have done. I really appreciate you helping me, giving me permission, to kind of ask the questions and to think about my own journey. And so, what I want people to get out of this is to write your own book. Sit down and think through what are the 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 15 experiences that you have had. Where are you today? Where did you start? And I don't care whether you've gone left or right or forward or backward or whatever. Where have you moved? How have you changed? So that's what I want people to get out of the book.
An important note to all of our listeners, we at Good Faith Media are always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head on over to goodfaithmedia.org/bookstore for more information. Russ, as we've discussed, you're both sharing your own story and inviting the reader to embark on their own similar journey towards home. Do you have a piece of your story or a question or something that you would like to share that might invite our readers to pick up your book and learn more?
I think one of the lasting messages that I want to give, I like to say I'm a cheerleader for the church. I really believe in the church. And while I'm not where I started, my Baptist church is not like my father's Baptist church in many, many ways. I have not ever really been tempted to leave the church, to leave faith. I have had other friends who have gone the way I have gone, and they've ended up, walking away. They've ended up leaving the church. And I have never really been tempted to that. And so, my book, Finding a New Way Home, I've been able to ask all the questions. I've been able to engage and deal with the issues that my parents taught me as a child. And in my conclusion of the book, I say, I believe almost everything my parents taught me as a Southern Baptist kid, going to Southern Baptist Sunday school and, all that stuff. I believe almost everything they taught me. I just believe it all differently. And it's really been it's been a way for me to deepen my own faith and engage my own faith without having to walk away. And I think my parents' example, while they theologically are in very different, they're aging now, and my dad's no longer in ministry. But I think their example in faith and something about the integrity of their lives and their faith and what it meant to them has been an underlying encouragement for me, even though I'm in a very different place now, personally, pastorally, this church. Their example of integrity and faith still, is still my example and still holds me close. And so I'd love for people to engage their faith as a way of staying in the faith. We go deeper in faith, not wander off and walk somewhere else, so that really is what has happened for me. It has caused me to dig deeper into each of the issues, into all the aspects of faith. I've never been tempted to walk away. And I'd love to give permission to ask all the questions they want to ask, to come with all the unconventional answers they want to give, all the unorthodoxy they need to bring, whatever it is, wherever you are, you can bring that, and you can bring that to the church. And I'm actually convinced the church isn't going to survive if we don't give people permission to do that. So engage your faith, ask all the questions you want to ask, and stay engaged in a church somewhere. I'm a church cheerleader. I want people to be engaged in faith, engaged in church.
Our guest today on Good Faith Reads has been Russ Dean, author of Finding a New Way Home, The Unlikely Path of a Reluctant Baptist Renegade. The book, along with more than 100 other titles, is available as both a print book and an ebook at goodfaithmedia.org/bookstore. Russ, I really appreciate you being our guest today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jan. I've enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate it.